name's David Temple. I'm conductor and founder, one of the founders of the world famous Crouch End Festival Chorus. But last summer I went moonlighting at the summer school at Gresham School in Norfolk. And one of the highlights of my week there was to go to a concert by the Ferio saxophone quartet. And I loved it so much that I hunted out Huw, who's sitting next to me, afterwards, and suggested that we should do something together. So very warm welcome to Huw and to Ellie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what I loved about it is that the saxophone quartet was absolutely everything. It was cornets and sackbuts, it was a cor anglais, it was a French horn, it was the human voice, the clarinet. Is that something that you enjoy doing?
Well, that particular programme which you heard, we played with pianist Anna Tilbrook at the time, and we did some pieces. We did the Pavan and Gigue by William Byrd, and we also played Bach's Brandenburg Concerto as well. On one of our albums, which we previously did for Chandos Records, we collaborated with choir, and the album was called Revoiced, and we collaborated with the Corvus Consorts. And I remember following the concert, I immediately said to Ellie, "Oh my gosh, this is David Temple," and we had conversations throughout the week, and and I said, "David, we would love for you to listen to this album," where we recorded lots of earlier works combined with contemporary works as well, and I gave it to you, and then we went from there, and it was just to see kind of what you would think.
When I was listening, and I really was listening, the first thing that came to my mind was Monteverdi. And I've still got this idea of doing the Monteverdi Vespers with you and perhaps a few more players as a completely reimagined way of doing it. In fact, that's what we're calling our concert, Reimagined. Slight play on words.
Yes.
So, 4 members of the quartet. Tell me, Ellie, what do you play in the quartet?
I play the alto saxophone. So kind of like the second violin, if you were to liken it to a string quartet.
And do you stick to that all the time?
Yes. Generally, we have our roles within the group, not only the instrument that we play, but also the role that we play within the group. So generally, we stick to it. I quite like being on the alto.
Yeah, it's a lovely. It's probably the most common one that children learn, isn't
Absolutely.
it, to start with? And Huw, what about you?
So I play the soprano saxophone. Just like Ellie was saying, I suppose you could liken that to the first violin in the group or the leader in the group. And I'd say we often do stick to those, don't we, I think? Although we do have ideas maybe sometimes. Actually, interestingly, on Revoiced, I played the tenor saxophone as well in some of the pieces. So that was another voice to explore a little bit as well.
Do you find it easy switching from one to the other?
I think maybe, you mentioned about alto saxophone. You do most commonly learn on alto, but then I definitely feel the most comfortable on soprano now. But then the fingering, interestingly, is all the same for all the saxophones. They're just in a different key. So you have the E flat saxophones, alto and baritone, which are in E flat, and then the B flat saxophones, soprano and tenor. So there's those transpositions to consider as well.
The thing that struck me was that it didn't sound like saxophones. It sounded like whatever you wanted it to be. And that's what I was so impressed by. Because I think when people see these posters and think, oh, there'll be saxophones and choir, it will sound like a kind of John Coltrane or something. But in a way, you're more classical sax players. And there's 2 others, there's a tenor sax and a baritone as well.
That's right, baritone saxophone.
And do they swap over occasionally?
No, I'd say that the heavy artillery at the bottom of the group, they tend to stay right down the bottom.
You've learned to play without vibrato, as well as with vibrato, and that's what, for me, makes the difference between the sounds that you produce on William Byrd and perhaps you may play slightly differently when you play George Gershwin. Is that true?
Yeah, so it's the saxophone, the nature of it is a very versatile instrument. It's a clarinet mouthpiece on the top of what was called an ophicleide. It looks a little bit like a baritone saxophone. And Adolpho Sax decided he wanted to bridge the gap between in military bands between the brass and the woodwind, and that's where the saxophone originated from. So actually, people think about it as a jazz instrument, but that's because it's so versatile, the nature of the instrument. So there are some times that we decide actually it needs to be as natural as possible with no vibrato at all, or we can really manipulate the sound depending on what we're playing. And
you've got a huge dynamic range as well, haven't you?
I mean, I think, you know, always we tried, I think for us, I personally love playing saxophone really quietly, when you really can play that pianissimo sound, and when we really reach a sort of, sometimes a string quartet dynamic, sometimes, you know, we imagine that we're listening, you know, thinking of a brass sound, sometimes more of an oboe sound, sometimes more of a string sound, sometimes more of a wind sound, and you can really, you know, it's an adaptable setup really that we love kind of touching on all these different sound worlds and working with different instrumental combinations and with singers. You know, it's wonderful to celebrate this with you.
Well, I think you'll be quite surprised when you hear the choir, because we can make a big noise, but we can also sing where you can hardly hear a pin drop, which is wonderful. I love that dynamic range. Interesting question. Why do you think the saxophones have never made it into the symphony orchestra?
Well, there's potentially a reason for it. That when Adolpho Sax went to get his patent for the saxophone, a lot of instrument repairers in Paris didn't want him to create these instruments because it was going to take work away from them. So there was a whole issue with him. And so therefore a lot of composers took that on board and didn't actually want to include the saxophone within the orchestra.
But many years have passed since then. I mean, I know it's in the Ravel Bolero, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also in
Mussorgsky.
Yeah, and Belshazzar's Feast.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and it still seemed to fit very nicely. I wonder whether it's just because those particular instruments, flutes, oboes, clarinets and bassoons, have become so established that people don't think outside the box, perhaps.
Quite possibly. I think also there's so much history in the orchestra, isn't it? And everything has naturally come up and evolved, whereas the saxophone, you know, isn't old at all. It isn't an old instrument. So kind of popping it in there, people might be quite...
Yeah, and I think it, you know, it does bridge the gap between the brass and the woodwind. And it does, you know, I think of the orchestral pieces which haven't a saxophone part, I think they work really well, but sometimes it's hard for composers to identify exactly where the saxophone could and should fit, really, which is a challenge, and it's featured more in orchestral settings now, which is great.
Yeah, in Porgy and Bess, for example, he has a standard symphony orchestra, and then suddenly he reverts to saxophone quartet and the drum kit, so he's going more towards the jazz thing. Tell me a bit about the album, which you did with Freddie.
Yes.
Whose idea was that?
So during the lockdown pandemic, Freddie approached us about doing a short piece by Bach, Just the Joy of Man's Desiring, which was done remotely with 12 singers, and then we were all obviously isolating individually in different places, so we then recorded the part that he arranged. So Freddie very much led on the initial piece, on the collaboration with singers, and then following that we spoke to our label Chandos Records, and then they really loved the idea, and then the pieces we all thought of together. You know, the composers we both had relationships with, and then all the pieces kind of slotted into place.
Yes, well, I've got interviews set up with Sarah Rimkus, James Macmillan and Roddy Williams. In fact, I've done one of them already, and amazing. They're all thrilled that we're doing this music in this concert, mixed with a lot of early music as well. What are the pieces that you're going to play in the concert?
So we'll be playing some George Gershwin, we've already mentioned, and we wanted to feature some earlier music, and really going back to Gresham's when we first met, we did play the William Byrd, and I think the Pavane Jig is something which is somewhat unexpected, and we find that audiences really, respond well to it, but also we really love playing that piece, so we'll be playing those. And then from our first album we recorded with Chandos Flux, we featured a Dutch composer, Guillermo Largo, and he composed for us these Ciudades, so we'll be playing one of those pieces also in the concert.
That's wonderful. I'm really looking forward to it. Within your group, are there any leaders in the group, or do you sort of collaborate and decide things together, or is it mainly one person? Ellie.
I think we all slightly take on different roles in terms of programming or accounting or kind of things like that. Within rehearsals, it's generally a very much a collaboration. But the quartet, I suppose, as an entity, we try to share as much as possible. But everyone has their strengths. And
I mean, Ellie and I, we've worked together for over 10 years now. We've celebrated our 15 years anniversary. Hold on, it was 2012, wasn't it?
2012. Yeah.
So 40, yeah. And Ellie and I are both founder members of the group, and I think then we have an amazing working relationship, and then I think for chamber music to really succeed, you kind of need to know the players playing more than your own, right? And like Ellie, I certainly have that with you, and I think Ellie, so you sort of know what to expect, and then the sound and the intonation and all this kind of fits into place, and then terms of sort of behaviour as well, knowing, listening to each other and considering everyone's point of view. I think you just need time to kind of really work that out for sure. Yeah. And that can then slot into place quite easily, I think. But chamber music can be very, very challenging.
Yeah, and I find people say to me, how do you conduct a Mahler 8 with 1,000 people or whatever? And it's much easier. They all just do as they're told. Whereas when you're in a small group or an ensemble, somebody's off at the loo, somebody's outside having a fag, and then it's really hard to get everybody together. Anyway, I am so looking forward to this concert. The concert's happening on Saturday, July the 11th at Holy Trinity Church, which is right next to Sloane Square. 7:30, be there because it'll be the most unique and wonderful concert you've ever been to. Thank you both.
Thanks
so much.